Have you ever wondered what happens to your trees when you don't water them correctly? Well, this right here is a good example. Sometimes, if you don't water your trees correctly, they will wilt and die. And that's if you're lucky. But if you're not lucky and you actually give your trees enough water to actually survive but not thrive, well, this will eventually happen to some trees. If you want to find out why, well, make sure you stick to the end. As you can see, this right here is a mesquite tree. It has been in the ground probably for many years until recently. We had a storm and guess what? It tipped over. And as you can see, its root ball is completely gone. Most of the roots were on the surface, and this tree right here has an extremely vigorous taproot system. But there is a reason why this tree tipped over and actually died. Well, it was not watered correctly. And that is very common in my area, especially with this HOA developments over here, because once they plant the trees in the ground, they never worry about it ever again. All right, so before we get started, you need to understand something about plants. Most plants that you put in the ground normally take about a year to root themselves in the ground. Until then, you are going to water them like you did in the container. Most likely keeping the root ball wet for that first summer. Once the plant is rooted in the ground, then you need to start watering them like they need to be watered, depending on the type of root system. But you also have to understand that if something happens to your plant during that rooting process, it wilts because you forgot to water, massive sunburn, it gets cold damage. Now it's going to take 1.5 to 2 years to root itself in the ground instead of 1 year. So keep that in mind for the remainder of the video, because that is very important to understand. So how do you actually water your trees then the right way? Well, in order to understand that, you need to understand the types of root systems. There are going to be 2 types of root systems out there. You're going to have shallow fibrous roots like this guava right here, and tap-rooted plants like this persimmon right here. So what is the difference? Plants that have taproot systems, as they get older, their roots go straight down in the ground, like that mesquite tree that fell over early in the video. While shallow fibrous roots plants, their root system stays usually closer to the ground. They only go a few feet below ground, compared to the ones that have tap roots or deep roots that go several feet into the soil. So how do you water your plants correctly as they get older? Well, the first thing you need to understand is what type of root system your plant has. Does it have shallow fibrous roots, or does it have deep roots or tap roots? If you're not sure, you need to go online and research the type of root system your plant has. If your plant has a shallow fibrous root system like this loquat right here, this plant right here will always require shallow, frequent watering. Deep water does not work on loquats in my area, simply because this plant's root system is very fibrous and they need the frequency. So this plant right here is happy if you water it every single day. This is an Italian fig right here, and this plant has a very deep root system. The older it gets, the deeper the roots go into the soil. So in my area, I have a lot of clay. Clay takes a long time to soak the water. So when I water this plant, I have to water slowly for a very long time to allow the water to go several feet into the soil. So when I water this plant right here, it gets watered for hours and hours and hours. But then I don't have to water every single day, because I'm watering deeper compared to this loquat right here. This loquat doesn't care about water 10 feet below ground. This one does. But this one right here only gets water right now in my area about every 5 days, but for hours. Now this one right here gets watered every single day, because if I waited 5 days to water it, it will die. So how does that relate to those trees that you saw earlier in the video? So the first tree that you saw in the video, I think that's some type of willow, and the second one is a mesquite trees. Both of those trees have taproot systems. As they get older, their roots go straight down in the ground. But if you notice, there's no tap roots there. The root ball is very shallow to the soil, to the surface of the soil. Why is that? Some plants, if you give them enough water, especially plants that have tap roots or deep roots, they will live and they will not die, but they will not thrive. So that's exactly what happened to those plants. When they first put them in the ground, they set the irrigation system and they turn the water on. Enough to wet their root ball for the first year, maybe even 2 years. But as the trees get older, their roots are supposed to go deeper into the soil. But if you notice in the video, there's nothing around that area. And that area, it has very compacted clay soil. And they never come back to adjust that drip irrigation system. In order for that water to actually reach down where the tree actually needs the water, they will need to water for hours. They definitely will need to probably change the emitters, the drip system they have in there, to be able to do water for hours without flooding the entire area. But they don't, because they don't care. They don't know, they don't care, and they just put the trees in the ground and call it a day, and they get paid. But the problem is, as the trees get older, their roots are supposed to go down, but there's no water below ground. Zero water. So the trees are not dumb. What they actually do, the root system will go down, and then it will notice that the water is staying on the surface. So it will go down and then come up and stay on the surface. The tree will still grow, maybe not as fast as it would if it actually was being watered correctly, but the roots are going to stay on the surface. And guess what's going to happen when the winds hit? The trees are going to tip over, just like you see in the video, because the roots are not deep in the ground to anchor the tree enough to withstand the winds. And this happens in my area all the time. But if you ask the master gardeners, the arborists, the ones that got PhD in horticulture, they're gonna tell you the trees are deficient in some type of nutrients, and that's the reason why they tipped over. But that is not the reason why. It's because they were not being watered correctly. Another thing you need to understand is how to water your plants correctly based on your soil. In my area, I have clay soil. It is hard, but it drains the water. But it takes a long time to drain the water depending where I'm standing on my property. So in this general area here, if I dump a bunch of water, the water will sit on the surface. And since it's extremely hot, it will evaporate before it soaks into the soil. And if you actually dig after watering the area, I can guarantee you it will be dry just an inch to 2 inches below ground. So ideally, it's better to water slowly over a longer period of time than to just dump a bunch of water all at once. Now, if you have sandy soil, this area over here drains the water super fast. I actually made a video about it if you want to check out my channel. But this area right here, you dump water and the water just goes through the soil immediately. So if you have sandy soil, water them for a very long time, every so often, it's not going to work out for you. You're going to have to water more frequently. But the good thing about that is you're not going to have to use as much water as I use here, because all that water is just draining through the soil very quickly. But you're going to have to water more often. Nobody can really tell you how often, how long, simply because in order for somebody to be able to tell you how often, how long to water your plants, they will need to understand exactly how fast your soil drains the water. They will need to understand what type of plant you have and the environment around the plant. If you're always getting confusing answers from everybody, telling you different, how often, how long to water your plants, that's the reason why their advice is not working, because that's like telling you how often, how long to drink water for the rest of your life. As plants get older, especially plants that have tap roots and deep roots, their roots will go deep into the soil. So you need to adjust your watering as your plants get older. So that means you're going to have to water longer. And if you have clay soil or soils that drain the water slowly, the good thing about that is you're not going to have to water as often. So as my trees get older here, I have to water longer, because it takes longer for the water to reach deeper into the soil. But the good thing is I don't have to water as often. So this plant right here, this is a Shangri-La mulberry tree. Right now this mulberry tree, I think I need to check my timer, but it's either every 5 or 6 days. But when I water it, it gets watered for hours and hours and hours, because I want the water to go at least 10 feet below ground. These trees right here are never gonna topple over, just like the trees you saw earlier in the video, because their roots are deep in the ground and I have been watering them correctly since day one. Some trees, like this ash tree right here, have very aggressive and invasive roots. But they only become aggressive and invasive if you don't water correctly. When I first bought this place, I've noticed this area over here was actually lifted. If you look at the concrete, you can tell this area here is being lifted by the root system of this ash tree. And it's even more noticeable over here. You can see the big gap in here, because this plant right here was not being watered correctly. They had an emitter, a drip irrigation system in there. It was coming on several times a day for only a few minutes. There's no possible way to water this tree for just a few minutes and that water reached 10, 15 feet below ground. Not a possible way. And the tree will tell you that by keeping its root system closer to the surface where the water was actually at. And since the root system of this ash tree, it's extremely strong, it will uplift anything. That's the main reason why this concrete in this area was being uplifted. But since I bought this place, I've been watering this tree correctly. It has grown, it looks beautiful, and it actually stopped uplifting the concrete. But let me give you an example how I started watering the tree the right way. So you see, as the trees get older, you don't have to water your trees next to the trunk. So what you usually do is you start backing off and follow the canopy of the tree. So anytime I want to water this tree right here, I usually put my hose right here, and then I let it run for like 24 hours straight, a slow trickle, and I want that water to go as deep as possible into the soil. But also, anytime I water my grapefruit over there in that general area, it's close by. This tree will get the water. Anytime I water my desert orchid over here, you see over there, this tree gets the water too. Anytime I water my loquat over there, 2 hours every single day, guess what? This tree here gets the water. So anytime I water in this general area, this tree right here gets the water. So if you just bought a place and you notice uplifting, it's not because the tree is invasive, it's because it hasn't been watered correctly. Now let's say you have a tree that has uplifted a wall, your house or something. What can you do in order to fix that? Well, there's not much you can do besides watering your tree the right way. That's going to take years. So if you're having issues, you need to start watering your tree the way it needs to be watered immediately. But you will not see results for about 1 year to 3 years. It took about 2 years before this tree actually stopped uplifting the concrete. That's a long time. Most people are impatient and they do not want to wait. Anybody else would have just chopped it. But I knew better. And now this tree, it's growing and no issues anymore. But if you have roots coming up to the surface, the reason why is because it's not being watered the way it needs to be watered. You may see water on the surface, but that water is not penetrating the soil deep enough to actually water that tree correctly. So a lot of the roots, which are thick and invasive on some trees, are staying closer to the surface, and that's the reason why you're having issues. So those trees you saw in the parking lot, even the new ones in the ground, there used to be trees there before. That's an old parking lot. It's been there for a very long time. And every storm we get, every year, the older ones, they just keep falling over. And what they do, they just rip them out and put new ones in the ground, and they keep making the same mistakes. If you also notice, a lot of the new trees in the ground are staked, which is a good thing to do, especially for brand new trees in the ground. They're not rooted in the ground because the canopies will catch the wind and they will tip over, and that may kill the tree. So it's always good to stake your trees for at least the first 1 year to 2 years until they root themselves in the ground. But then what you do is you need to remove the stakes to allow the tree to get used to the wind, to become stronger. But they never do that there. What they do is they set them and forget about them. And those stakes stay there until the tree itself pulls the stakes off. And the problem with that is the trees never get used to the wind. On top of the incorrect watering, that's exactly what you are going to get. So if you're thinking about getting plants with tap roots or deep roots, keep in mind as your trees get older, you're going to have to deep water them. That's what deep water means. The water needs to penetrate the soil deep below ground. If you're not sure what type of tree you have, just do some research. Comment below, join my Patreon. I will answer your questions. I will help you out. But remember, plants are easy. All you need to understand is how to water them correctly. As always, if you have any questions, comment below. If you haven't liked the video, what are you waiting for? And I will see you next time.